Yes.
So I don't think we need the document up on the screen, but the difference between the two dates are that all blood and blood components have routinely been processed by leukodepletion techniques from the 1st of November 1999, but from the 1st of April 2000, only leukodepleted blood products will be transfused to patients within the NHS.
So the difference is between blood and blood components on the one hand and blood products on the other.
Yes, although the blood products were the process of leukodepleting them started on the 1st of November 99.
Yes.
But it was they presumably were using up all the old unleukodepleted stock of blood products between November 99 and April 2000.
Well, yes, and there may have been blood products may last for some time.
Yes.
Yes.
So that takes us, sir, then to the 26th of October 2000, when the BSE inquiry report was published, and on the same date, the government announced it would set up a fund for the care of victims of vCJD to ensure a speedy response to diagnosis and improvement in the quality of care for such patients, to be coordinated through the Research and Surveillance Unit in Edinburgh, and a compensation scheme operated through a special trust fund. And then we know from the evidence we've heard in the last few days that the first meeting of the CJD incident panel took place on the 10th of November 2000. And then in December 2000, BPL, on the 14th of December 2000, BPL notified consignees of the expired product that had been provided, made from donations of a donor diagnosed with vCJD. And then we see on the 18th of January from the Haemophilia Society and from the 19th of January from the UKHCDO to Haemophilia Centre directors, correspondence relating to that. So 18th of January, Haemophilia Society posts a letter to its members notifying them of the fact that some expired BPL products have been used from plasma obtained from a donor who's now been diagnosed with vCJD. And that information is also communicated by the UKHCDO to the Haemophilia Centre directors on the 19th of January. And then on the 29th of January 2001, Lord Hunt, in a written answer to a parliamentary question, stated that the UKHDCO, in consultation with the Department of Health, had agreed a policy of giving all haemophilia patients information about the December 2000 vCJD incident, BPL incident, and offering them the choice as to whether they wished to know whether they or their children had received the implicated clotting factor. And then in between February and May 2001, we see these draft letters from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Troop, that we've looked at in the hearings over the last few days, interim guidance on what hospitals should be telling patients about vCJD implicated products. And we still don't know whether or not that was ever issued, but we will continue to investigate that. And then we know as well from the evidence that's been given over the last few days that on the 10th of October 2001, the CJD incident panel launched its consultation on the management of possible exposure of CJD through medical procedure, which included its consultation on informing and notifying people about their exposure to vCJD. Jumping forward now to the 15th of August 2002, we have an announcement from Hazel Blears that the National Blood Authority has been instructed to import fresh frozen plasma from the USA for neonates and children born after the 1st of January 1996, and that this would be virally inactivated using methylene blue treatment. And then between October and November 2002, the inquiry has a series of letters from the Professor Lowe as co-director of the Scotland and Northern Ireland Haemophilia Centre Directors Group, to the Scottish CMO, Dr. Armstrong, and then letters from the haemophilia centres to patients, and then indeed a letter from Dr. Keel, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, to Professor Lowe, in relation to the fact that the Scottish and Northern Irish Haemophilia Centre directors had been informed 8 months previously about an SNBTS batches of product that had been contributed to by somebody who had died from vCJD. And they had been unable to, that they were waiting for guidance from the CJD incident panel, and it hadn't been forthcoming. And so they were informing the Chief Medical Officer that they were going to give information to their patients about that incident, and indeed that is what they did. On the 17th of December 2002, the Department of Health purchased an independent US plasma collector, Life Resources Incorporated. And if we can just look at the press release in relation to that, it's HCDO 40266-021. It's HCDO 40266-021. So what's said there is that the Department of Health has today purchased the largest remaining independent US plasma collector, Life Resources Incorporated, to secure long-term supplies of non-UK blood plasma for the benefit of NHS patients. This deal, which was completed in the US yesterday evening, will ensure that the current global plasma shortage will not reduce the availability to NHS patients of life-saving plasma products, such as immunoglobulins and clotting factors. And then if we go down to the third paragraph, the plasma from Life Resources will be manufactured into plasma products by the NHS-owned Bioproducts Laboratory, who supply 45% of NHS needs. The NHS has been using US-sourced plasma since 1998 as part of its vCJD risk reduction strategy. The US has no reported cases of BSE. It is the only country able to supply the quality of plasma we need in sufficient quantity. The US collects 60% of the world's plasma and supplies between 35 to 45% of the plasma products used in Europe alone. In February 2003, we have the second version, the updated version of the DNV risk assessment of exposure to vCJD infectivity in blood and blood products. And Professor Ironside gave us some evidence in relation to that. And then on the 9th of June 2003, as we've heard over the last few days, the Chief Medical Officer responded on behalf of all of the four chief medical officers from the four countries in the UK to the CJD Incidence Panel Framework document. And on December 2003, the Department of Health accepted the final version of the framework document. And then we heard today that was published in March 2004. On the 22nd of January 2004, there was an extraordinary meeting of the MSBT convened to discuss the implications to the UK blood services of a case of possible transmission of vCJD by blood transfusion. And it was agreed that previously transfused donors, i.e. those who had received transfusions after the 1st of January 1980, should be excluded from donating. And that date was chosen on the basis that there would have been no dietary exposure to BSE in the UK before then. It was agreed that that exclusion should relate to UK transfusions only, and that advice was subsequently accepted by all 4 of the devolved administrations. We then have, on the 21st of April 2004, the meeting of the CJD Incident Panel Technical Subgroup that we've heard about from Professor Ironside, and the decision that they made on that date to notify patients with bleeding disorders under what's been called the umbrella approach. And on the 22nd of July 2004, Dr. John Reid, who was then the Secretary of State for Health, in a written ministerial statement, announced the second probable case of vCJD transmission through a blood transfusion. On the 9th of September 2004, there is a further ministerial statement by the Secretary of State for Health, Dr. John Reid, announcing the notification exercise that we've been hearing about over the last few days. On the 20th of July 2005, Caroline Flint, the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State for the Department of Health, in a written ministerial statement, gave a report on the 2005 notification process. And on the 31st of June 2006, we see guidance being published on the assessment to be carried out before surgery and/or endoscopy to identify patients with an increased risk of CJD or vCJD, known as Annex J. Can we turn to that, please? It's WITN 3093024. So we can see here that this is a summary that's been revised since January 2014, but it says this: Annex J provides a method of assessing CJD and vCJD risk prior to surgery or endoscopy. Certain groups of patients have been informed that they are at increased risk of CJD or vCJD. Therefore, it's recommended that all patients about to undergo any surgery or endoscopy should be asked if they have ever been notified at being at increased risk of CJD or vCJD. In addition, patients undergoing surgery or neuroendoscopy, which may involve contact with tissues of potentially high-level TSE infectivity, known as high-risk tissues, should, through a set of detailed questions, be assessed for their possible unrecognised CJD, vCJD risk. So in relation to that, all patients, we go to page 2, please, and we see the recommendation there. Recommendation for all surgical and endoscopy patients. The question that is recommended: all patients should be asked, have you ever been notified that you are at increased risk of CJD or vCJD for public health purposes? And then, depending on what the response is, different actions are set out below. And then for the patients that are undergoing a surgery or neuroendoscopy involving high-risk tissues, we see, we go please to page 4, and we see the series of questions that should be put to these patients down the left-hand side. 1, have you a history of CJD or other prion disease in your family? If yes, please specify. And then 2, have you ever received growth hormone or gonadotropin treatment? Then 3, have you ever had surgery on your brain or spinal cord? And then, depending on what the answer is, the actions are set out there. Then on the 18th of January 2007, the Health Protection Agency issued a press release reporting the 4th case of vCJ transmission associated with blood transfusion. And on the 28th of March 2007, a report from the vCJD Clinical Governance Advisory Group, chaired by Sir William Stewart, is published. Now, I won't go to that report for reasons of time, but for those that want to look at it, it says HCDO 40902. And that report makes a series of recommendations about the appropriate clinical governance arrangements, including follow-up care and support for individuals identified as at risk from developing vCJD. And it also advises on appropriate monitoring of such individuals. And in particular, it makes recommendations about the appropriate relationship between such people's GP, their local neurologist, and the specialist services such as the prion unit. In June 2008, the Protein Fractionation Centre in Scotland closes. And in February 2009, we see the Health Protection Agency writing to all UK haemophilia centre directors, notifying them of the post-mortem finding of asymptomatic vCJD in a person with haemophilia, and informing them that it did not change the public health at-risk status of any such patients. And we heard evidence both from Professor Ironside in relation to that finding and from Dr. Connor in relation to that correspondence. Then on the 5th of February 2009, the CJD incident panel meeting noted the CMO had accepted the panel's recommendation for a two-pronged strategy for highly transfused individuals. So the first prong of the strategy was to identify highly transfused patients with 80 or more donor exposures, and that would be done through pre-assessment for surgery and neuroendoscopy on high-risk tissue. And that was to start in April 2009. So in other words, those who are presenting for such surgery would be asked whether or not they had had 80 or more donor exposures, and that would be how they would be identified. The second prong would be a prospective notification of very highly transfused patients with more than 800 donor exposures, and that was to start in July 2009. And that strategy was noted as having been approved by the Chief Medical Officers for all 4 nations. We then see in July 2009 changes being made to Annex J. Can we have, please, RLIT 301222. And this is a letter from Health Protection Scotland and NHS National Services Scotland to dear colleague, chief executives of NHS boards, about pre-surgical assessments for vCJD, risk in neurosurgery and eye surgery units. It says this: your hospitals should already be using Annex J, and we've just looked at that. We are writing to inform you that Annex J of the TSE infection control guidance has recently been revised and now advises that patients who are due to have high-risk surgery or neuroendoscopy should be asked whether they have received transfusion of blood or blood components from 80 or more donors since 1980. This is because those patients may have an increased risk of being infected with vCJD, and special infection control precautions should be followed for their high-risk surgery or neuroendoscopy. This may involve destroying surgical instruments. If a patient is found to have an increased risk of vCJD due to receipt of blood from 80 or more donors, this information should be marked on their medical records, and the patient will need to be informed of their increased risk via Health Protection Scotland and their GP. And it says, please forward this letter and enclosed document to the leads for surgery, haematology and infection control in your board. We then come to 3rd of February 2011 and the publication by Professor Collins and others on his blood-based assay test, and we had information and evidence from Professor Collins in relation to that. And then on the 31st of March 2011, as we heard from Professor, in fact, I don't think we did, SIAC was abolished. On the 24th of January 2013, we have a letter from the Health Protection Agency to UKHCDO. We turn that up, please. It's WITN 3775004. And this is in relation to the denotification process. And it says that it's a letter from HPA to the UKHCDO. No, sorry, the UK Haemophilia Doctors Association. And it says that in 2012, the Health Protection Agency reviewed the risk assessment for vCJD transmission through the receipt of UK-sourced plasma products. This has led to the recommendation that individuals who received factor 8 and factor 9 between 1990 and 2001 should remain notified as at increased risk of vCJD. Individuals who have only received plasma products between 1980 and 1989 should now have their treatment history reassessed to confirm this fact, and if it is confirmed, they should be denotified. And then on the 24th of July 2014, the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee published its report After the Storm, which we looked at briefly today. I want to turn to that again and just read out a few of the passages there. It's WITN 3733002. It's a long, lengthy report, and for reasons of time, I'm not going to read out very much of it, and others can look at it if they wish. But it's helpful to look at the summary, which we find at page 5. And third paragraph down, while cases of vCJD are now rare, recent studies indicate that tens of thousands of people in the UK might be silent carriers of the prions responsible for the disease and could perhaps transmit these prions to others. Next paragraph. The government acknowledges this risk and claims that, like its predecessors, it has taken a precautionary stance in response. However, while administrations in the late 1990s assumed the worst and took steps to prevent it from happening, the government recently appears to have adopted a more optimistic approach in which the low incidence of identified cases of vCJD is used as a justification for inaction. This is particularly evident in the government's less than enthusiastic response to emerging vCJD risk mitigation technologies, such as prion filtration and the prototype of vCJD blood assay recently developed by the MRC prion unit. In this report, we remind the government that no evidence of harm is not the same as evidence of no harm. And then last paragraph there, the government's casual attitude to vCJD transmission is not confined to blood transfusion, and it sets out the view about risks to surgical transmission. And if we go over the page, please, at the last paragraph there, at the conclusion of this inquiry, we are unconvinced that the government has done all that it potentially could do to ensure that the UK blood supply is and continues to be free of dangerous pathogens. We therefore conclude by recommending that the government commission a full assessment of the key risks, known and unknown, that the UK blood supply currently faces and might face in the future, so that it can identify and fill relevant knowledge gaps and support the development of appropriate risk reduction measures and technologies. And then we come to 26.
Well, just before we do that, I wonder if you could help me with just it's a very, very minor detail of dating. You said this was the 24th of July, 2014, and that's what's in your chronology. But can we go back to the first page
Yes.
of this?
Yep.
Ordered by the House of Commons to be printed 16th of July 2014.
Yes, I think
So,
it should.
but then that was the order, the date it was ordered to be printed, and if you go down to the very bottom of the page, it was actually published then on the 24th. So it took 8 days to be published.
Not quite. I think ordered to be printed on the 16th, published on the 24th. Yes, I don't know which is the better date, whether it's the date of publication or the order of printing.
I don't know. I just mention it because
Yes.
it's a detail which I confess until we came back to this page, I didn't notice the smaller bit published on the 24th of July. I just was wondering where that came from. But there's anyway, what it's worth.
And then, other than to say that 2016 was the death of the last known case of the death of the person last known to have vCJD in the UK, that brings me to the end of this presentation.
Yes. Well, thank you very much indeed. Now, tomorrow
we have David Mellor giving evidence.
Yes, the former MP.
Yes.
10 o'clock. 10 o'clock tomorrow.